Has your relationship been affected by pornography addiction? If so, you are not alone and help is here. In today's episode of Love, Happiness, and Success, we are tackling the toughest questions like how can you recognize the signs, the warning signs of a pornography addiction? And also, what does recovery look like for an individual wanting to make changes and also as a couple? If you are partnered with someone who's struggling with this, we're talking about how you can support them and their recovery and encourage positive change without losing yourself or compromising yourself in the process. So if this is a thing in your life, I'm glad you're here. Stay with me all the way to the end because you're going to get a clear path forward with tons of resources and concrete strategies for how to improve the situation, whether you're healing on your own or together. Joining us today is someone who's turned his greatest struggle into his life's work. Sathiya Sam, founder of Deep Clean program, has walked this painful path of pornography addiction and has emerged stronger and is now dedicating his life to helping others do the same. His mission: to help men break free from addiction and also to give couples the tools they need to heal and thrive. Okay. All right, so Sathiya, thank you so much for joining me today. I am excited to talk to you about this.
Thanks for having me. You gave a fantastic interview on my podcast, so I hope I can return maybe half the favor. Yours was pretty good.
Well, I had such a good time talking on your podcast. And let's just talk about that for a second, because truly you have dedicated yourself to helping other people on this mission. And before we go any further, I mean, we'll talk about this more at the end, but you have a lot of resources for individuals and couples dealing with this. Do you want to say just a second about what it is that you do and where people can learn more about you just as they're listening from you as we're talking today?
Yeah, I mean, my whole work is really birthed out of my own experience. I was
Yeah.
addicted to pornography for 15 years.
Mm.
I didn't have the upbringing that you think would lend itself to an addiction. Grew up in a pastor's home, Christian education. Both parents were well educated, that kind of idea. But I stumbled into pornography in the computer lab of my school. That was a private Christian school where you wouldn't expect this kind of stuff to go on. And that was, I mean, that was a long time ago, actually, in a day and age when pornography wasn't even as pervasive as it is today.
Yeah.
But for me, that was the start of 15 years of struggling and not really getting a lot of solutions. People weren't really talking about it. And it felt like the stuff that people did tell you to do was more or less useless because it was all about modifying the behavior. It wasn't really about systemic change, at a more internal heart level. So that was my frustration amidst the recovery process. And I had always purposed that if I could figure this thing out, I would do everything in my power to help as many other people as possible get free as well.
Yeah.
And fast forward a little bit, I had my last relapse in February 2016. And in 2018 is when I launched Deep Clean. Very naively and innocently, I had good intentions, but no clue what I was doing. Just knew I wanted to help people. But we've had over 10,000 people actually learn and go through our system. And our audiences have grown. I think people are becoming a lot more aware of the harmful effects of pornography. And in the process, I got married. I have a son now, and we're growing a family. And it's been an amazing story for me, and amazing that I get to be part of other people's stories now too.
Can you talk a little bit about the key signs of pornography addiction and how someone can recognize if they or their partner are struggling with it? And I'd also love for you to speak a bit to what would be considered garden variety. I mean, masturbation is a thing, casual porn use is a thing, and no reason to do pearl clutching unnecessarily, versus a situation where it is kind of going above and beyond and achieving a level of an addiction where it is starting to impact somebody's life, somebody's relationship. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that distinction and the signs that you look for when you're like, yeah, we probably need to do something about that?
Pornography is the 3 A's. Okay. It's affordable, it's accessible, and it's anonymous. Those 3 A's are very helpful for us though, because they not only reveal why people get into pornography, they also reveal why people stay stuck. And so you're asking, what are some of the indicators maybe that somebody is watching pornography problematically? Because there is casual porn use, and
Yeah.
this conversation really isn't for people who are engaging in casually rather. Although
Hmm.
there's still some data that we could talk about there. But
Okay.
I think the three A's actually give us some good insights. So pornography is affordable, and one of the great signs that somebody is addicted to anything is when money starts to go missing. Money's not accounted for. Money mysteriously starts
Ah,
to show up. Most people
interesting.
fall into pornography usage because it's free. But trust me, if you stay watching long enough, or if this really has a stranglehold in your life, you will put a credit card down for an OnlyFans account. Maybe it ends up being hookups. It's a very common story is people watch pornography. Pornography is no longer doing it, so then they seek in-person extramarital affairs, all those kinds of things. So that's on the affordability side. The accessibility. So one thing that often would be a great indicator somebody maybe has an addiction is
Hmm.
they're not as accessible. So they're
Hmm.
hiding. There's something
Interesting.
hiddenness about it. And this is something we often hear from spouses is I like, because again, there's over 100,000 people following my account on Instagram,
Hmm.
lots of women who are saying, how do I know if my husband's struggling or my husband's doing XYZ? Should I be
Yeah.
concerned? And uh, there's not like if they do this behavior. But the
Hmm.
one thing that we have identified is usually the women kind of know. They can kind of tell there's
Yeah.
something in them that says
You can feel it.
something's off, and
Yeah.
usually they're right. Usually they're right. And the last part is the anonymity. And so again, I
Mm.
would say there's usually some accessory
Mm.
components like emotionally they're not as present. Sometimes
Yeah.
even physically they're not as present. They're out in the evenings a little bit more and
Yeah.
whatever. There's usually these changes in behavior, but it's very subtle. So
Hmm.
if it's a stark thing, it's I often say like we have to assess a little bit more. It's
Hmm.
usually though when it's like now that I reflect on the last 2 years, he does seem to be a bit more disconnected.
Mm.
Or yeah, every weekend, like he seems to have more work trips now, or whatever it is. Some of those indicators can be there as well.
Yeah. What is it like in the bedroom if your partner is dealing with a pornography addiction? Like, how does it show up in your sex life?
I would say porn addiction at its core is an intimacy disorder. In general, if the intimacy in the relationship is suffering,
Uh huh.
really, really good indicator. Like, again, I agree with you. Like, we can't just say, oh, it's for sure a pornography addiction. Very good sign. And that would be intimacy at large, whether
Mm.
it's physical, sexual, emotional, or other.
Yeah.
Um, Generally speaking, when people are addicted to pornography, though, the sex life is majorly affected. And
Yeah.
even the research would suggest that when people are addicted to porn, they generally they will report lower levels of sexual satisfaction.
Hmm.
Porn usage also gives rise to a plethora of sexual issues. There's a
Hmm.
condition called porn-induced erectile dysfunction.
Really?
Um, yeah, and it's estimated that about 30% of men under the age of 40 experience it today. And that's not solely because of porn use. There's stress and there are some other factors,
Sure.
but porn use is a major, major factor for that. And I can explain some of the data behind that if we want to get into it.
Yeah.
Another big one, there's actually two other big ones, which are premature ejaculation and delayed ejaculation. Very
Mm-hmm.
common, ironically, they're opposites, but very common side effects of
Okay.
chronic porn consumption over a longer period of time.
But what about emotional intimacy, relational intimacy? Are there relational issues that you see kind of popping up when something like this is
Yeah.
present?
So if we think about like what healthy sex would be in a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
the both partners experience arousal through each other. They
Mm-hmm.
have an experience, and afterwards they both feel satisfied. Okay, that's like super nuts and bolts, very mechanical, obviously, but you know
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah.
What happens when you view pornography, especially over long periods of time?
Mm-hmm.
Pornography is what they call a supernormal stimulus. So I was a
I
university researcher
see.
before, so I love diving into some of the neuroscience here.
I love it too.
When you watch more and more of it, what happens is
Mm-hmm.
your threshold for what you need to experience arousal gets higher and
Right.
higher and higher. And
Mm-hmm.
porn is hyper produced, right? We kind of forget that there's directors behind the camera saying, "And cut, we
Yeah.
need to do that differently." It has
Right.
to be the perfect super sensory kind of experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what happens for the porn addict is they get so acclimatized to viewing this highly stimulating content
Yeah.
that an in-person experience, even with somebody that is very beautiful and maybe they find attractive, doesn't compare.
Yeah.
And because of that, they experience the porn-induced erectile dysfunction or the
Hmm.
delayed ejaculation or whatever it might be, because they literally just don't, their body does not respond the same way because it's been conditioned.
I think people listening right now are very eager to know. And again, this is a huge topic in and of itself, but speaking generally, what are the kinds of steps that someone can take to stop a pornography addiction and not just stop the behaviors, but really start to heal from this internally, relationally? And just paint us a picture. Like, what does that recovery timeline even look like in your experience?
If there's anything that your audience gets from our interview today, hopefully it's this. When it comes to recovery, the way we want to approach this is heart first, behavior second.
Definitely.
So generally, if you look at a lot more of the mainstream solutions around pornography, especially, I come from a faith-based background, and I would say especially in faith-based circles, a lot of them are around willpower, white
Yeah.
knuckling, get an internet filter. They're all kind of in this category of behavior modification. And Dr.
Hmm.
Lisa, you and I both know that if somebody really wants to change anything in their life long term, we got to go a lot deeper than the behavior.
Yeah.
We got to figure out what's going underneath that behavior, the
Hmm.
beliefs and the paradigms and the thought life and the emotions and everything with it. So our whole mantra is we believe in a roots-based approach to recovery. And
Hmm.
so I believe there's 3 steps that are required to do this effectively. The first is developing self-awareness. The second is recovering from trauma. And the third is shifting your identity. And we've just seen, even, I mean, again, we don't think we're the only person or only people you have to come to experience recovery. But even all my colleagues, all the people that I've studied over the years that have been successful helping people quit pornography, all of their protocols and practices more or less boil down to these 3 pillars. And so we've built our own system around this. And if you can wrap this in community where you're connecting with other like-minded people who are pursuing recovery as well, and have the guidance of an expert, somebody who gets what they're
Hmm.
talking about and can really lead you through the system,
Yeah.
that seems to stack the odds in the favor of somebody having a successful and a lasting recovery.
Hmm. How does pornography addiction affect relationships? How does it affect the partner, right? And also, what can partners do to support and promote recovery without enabling the behavior, but also like without sacrificing themselves and going along with things that are really not okay for them?
So
Yeah.
I would say 2 things. Number one is betrayal trauma almost always lands on pre-existing trauma.
Hmm.
So, in other words, a woman who experiences betrayal trauma, usually that is actually pulling on threads of earlier childhood trauma where they experienced something similar, albeit in a different environment or different context. So, I think it's helpful for people to understand those reactions and responses you're having are so legitimate, and there's a reason they're there.
Yeah.
And if the prototypical recovery journey is, okay, you have the husband who's addicted or the man who's addicted, you have the woman who is not addicted who feels betrayed. The husband does his work and recovers from the addiction. The woman does her work, working through the betrayal, the hurt, the trauma, and they come together and then start to do their own work on the relationship when they both feel like they trust the other enough to at least make that step.
Hmm.
That I would say is the if I could cast some vision for what this can look like
Yeah.
when it goes really well,
Hmm.
I think that's typically what the journey looks like. For a woman who's just saying, okay, well, that sounds great, but my husband doesn't think it's a problem, or
Right.
we tried doing that, it didn't work, whatever.
Yeah.
I would say number one, always identify the controllables. So for the betrayed partner, what's within your realm of control? And I
Hmm.
would say it's the hurt, it's the stuff you're dealing with. If he's not going to take care of his stuff, obviously you have to have a conversation about, can you handle this in the relationship? Do you want to
Yeah.
stay around? That's where you come in, Dr. Lisa. They should be talking to you and having those conversations with you. If they want to if they want to work through some of the betrayal trauma and stuff, I think that's a great path to take. I don't know any woman who's gone down that path and regretted it. They always get more healing, more discovery, more perspective, more clarity. And usually, if they go through that change, even if you have an unmotivated, addicted partner,
Hmm.
them witnessing that change often has, like, I shouldn't say often, but at times
Yeah.
has catalyzed
Oops.
the partner to
Hmm.
then go and do the work himself. So I
Yeah.
think that can really go a long way.
Right.
And I would say the other thing is if you do want to encourage your partner to get some help, and maybe they want to get some help or they're at least open to it, find content that you find valuable, that you think they'd be interested in, and share it. We have
Hmm.
seen so many people share our content on Instagram, share it with their husbands, and maybe not right away, but like 3 months later, 6 months later, the husband reaches out to us on Instagram, or they email us in, or they book a call with our team, and we ask them like, "Hey, how'd you hear about us?" or "How did this all come about?" And often we'll hear that, "Oh, actually, my wife was sending some content of
Hmm.
yours, and I thought it was really interesting." And eventually they kind of warm up to it. So again, just finding the content that you think is valuable, the content that's useful.
Hmm.
That's the stuff that you want to, I would say, get in front of them, and you just never know what kind of seeds it might plant for them down the road.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And it is planting seeds because I think when it comes to that internal work and developing self-awareness is that you need a counter narrative that anybody who is stuck in an addiction is telling themselves a story about what it is and why it's okay, and just to have little things starting to break through that provide this different
Yeah.
perspective can be like, maybe. And you're right, it doesn't happen right away, but over time it can begin to shift, and it can be a non-threatening way to begin just
Mhm.
taking in information. And this is a wonderful opportunity to tell people where they can find you on Instagram, just in case that would be of interest to them. Where should people find you?
Sure. Yeah, the handle is Sathiya Me Sam, and
Hmm.
so yeah, maybe we can put the link in the show notes. But we
Definitely.
respond to every message that comes through. It's really important to us. We take it very seriously that people are getting the resources and the help they need. And if we can't help
Hmm.
you ourselves, we have a good network as well to just refer you out to the right people that can serve you. So that's a great place. And then we have a podcast as well called Man Within, and we interview amazing guests like yourself and talk about all things masculinity, recovery, faith,
Yeah.
relationships, and everything in between. And that's available on all platforms.
Well, Sathiya Sam, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.